Hi guys, hello. It's Ola from Cool Mentors IT, and today a very important topic that is hoisting.
What?
Hoisting. So hopefully after today you will know everything there is to know in order for you to become a software engineer in 2021 and get your dream job. So there has been one thing we've been going over and over again, and I promise you it's not just because I wanted to torture you, but it's because it's like quite essential in order to understand the topic of hoisting. So how do we create variables? Creation of a variable is like a two-step process. First step being a declaration. So what if we use a keyword var and then give it a name for a variable, or it could be a let, or it could be a const, but without any specific value, it's a declaration. So we declare to the program that we create that variable, but we don't give it any specific value. So JS what it does for us, if we don't give it any specific value, it would just automatically assign it with a value of undefined. So declaration without any value, automatically it is undefined. We can also declare functions, not only variables. Again, we use the keyword function, then one is the name of my function, but it's totally up to you. You could use a totally different name, empty brackets, and then in the curly braces goes the block of code. So the thing that this function would actually do. So first step, declaration. The second step, initialization. So in the line 1, I've created a variable a. I didn't give it any value, but on the next line, I already know that a exists, and I want to specify that I want a to have a value of 5. So that's declaration, and then I initialized it with a value of 5. I could do it all at the same time in one go, declare a variable, like for instance variable b, and give it a value of 20. So even though it's done at the same time, it's still a two-step process. And it's kind of important to know, because we could have, if we wanted to, divide it into those two steps and first create a variable b without anything. That would be just an empty declaration, and then give it a value of 20 and split it into 2 lines. So hoisting. Hoisting, if you were ever asked to describe it in your own words, but just to illustrate like more or less what it does, is as if a declaration has been moved to the beginning of the code.
We have to go back!
So for instance here, JS goes through from the top to the bottom. So I asked the program to console log a, but a doesn't exist yet because it's only created afterwards. But what JS does for us is like extracting the declaration. So it would divide that variable a equals 5 into a declaration. That would be just variable a, it exists, assign it a value of undefined and move it to the top, because it only moves the declaration without its value. So we've got a variable a, the declaration moved to the top, and the rest of the code remains unchanged. So the console log a, and that a variable a equals 5. It's afterwards. But at this point, when we try to console log value of a, it would print out undefined, because as far as JS is concerned, at this point, variable a is a value of undefined, because the value of 5 has been assigned only afterwards. And that's what hoisting does for us. And also quite important that it is what Hoisting does for us, but with variables created with the keyword var. And at this point, I think that two things that are worth mentioning and worth remembering. So that statement that the declaration is moved somewhere, like to the beginning of the code, is not exactly 100% true, because physically nothing is changed in our code, nothing moves. It's only for the purposes of like the visual aid, so that it's easier to understand what is happening behind the scenes. We like physically are splitting it, moving around, and in order to see the order of what is happening, but physically nothing is changed in the code. And the other thing is that you probably have read a little bit about JS, and you now know that JavaScript is not a compiled language, meaning as an interpreted language, the JS engine parses through the code, and as soon as it passes through the code, it executes the code. So the code is executed at its runtime. It reads the code and executes the code. However, this process would still consist of two stages. So at first, the JS engine would parse through the code, so it's like the compilation phase, and only after it's done, but it takes only like a fraction of a second, it would execute the code. And at this compilation phase, it would kind of like do the hoisting. That's when hoisting happens. So it would find that the variable A, extract the declaration and move it to the top. And if you don't believe me, I would definitely refer you to Kyle Simpson. Kyle Simpson is like my biggest authority as far as JS is concerned. So it's like I'm only listening to him and then I only repeat what he said. We kind of say that the declaration has moved to the beginning of the code, but it isn't just moved like randomly around to the beginning of the code. If we have a global variable, it would be moved to the beginning of its global scope. If we have a function scope, that variable or the declaration of that variable would be moved to the beginning of that function scope. So, and one more thing is that functions would be moved first, and only after functions or the declarations of functions are moved to the top, then the variables are hoisted. So have a second, you can stop here for a little while and have a guess what would happen here. What's going to happen with this code here? So we've got a console log, variable a equals 5, then declaration of function, and then execution of that function. So as I said, function would be moved first. So we've got function here at the top, then the rest of the code. So variable a would be split. So we take that declaration and we move it to the top. We've got a variable a declared with the value of undefined, and then the rest of the code goes as normal. So we've got console log and the assignment of a value, and at the end execution of function 1. Have a look on, let's just save it. Okay, have a look at the code, at the example code here. So technically, in both cases, since only a declaration has been moved to the top, it has got a value of undefined. So both this console log here should print out undefined, and function 1 that has been asked to be executed at the end should also print out undefined. Let's save it. Let's refresh. We've got 2 times undefined, meaning hoisting actually works. But let's double check. If I move this variable b to where it was, so at first console log, it's looking for a value of variable a, and even though technically it doesn't exist, hoisting already worked its magic, so the declaration has been moved to the top. However, the value remained where it was at the end after the console log, hence the program is printing undefined. Then I'm executing function 1, variable b with the value of 10 already exists, so the next line that has been asked to console log its value has no problem finding it because it already exists in the code and no hoisting was ever required. And printing out 10, no problem.
No problem!
Hoisting. You guys, it is simple. Hoisting is not complicated. Once you understand its magic, it's like you get it. But those guys, if you go to an interview, those guys there are like, they might be super nice, but don't get fooled, they are tricky. They won't just, more often than not, they will not ask you, tell me all you know about hoisting. Oh, describe hoisting. No, they will take their markers, they will start writing lines of code on that whiteboard using a lot of like variable foo, let bar, a variable x, and etc., like making really confusing. And then they will ask you to analyze that code, and that's when they will verify if you understand how hoisting works and what moves where and how it all works. So bear that in mind, that you go there, you're stressed and you forget things, so it's very important that you work through a few examples on your own so that you actually know what would be printed out, because I promise you it's very easy to get confused at the interview with those nice guys verifying if you know if you understand what you're talking about. Hoisting moves a variable and function declaration. So yes, not only a variable but a function. So when we talk about variables, it's kind of easy because we've been through it. So that's the declaration of a variable. The only way we've created functions so far is this traditional way with a keyword, function, then the name for a variable, empty brackets, and the curly braces. But this is not the only way to create functions. If we create a function using this old traditional way, this is a function declaration. Or you could use a function expression, and that's a very different thing, because we use, for instance, we assign a function would be an assigned value to a variable. So we've created a variable b, and then we gave it a value of that function, anonymous function. You can see that function keyword still exists in the code, but there is no name for our function. And it's still totally valid function. It's just a function expression using an anonymous function. Here, as per usual, we assign a primitive data type value of 5 to a. I think variables are clear to understand. So let's put our focus for now on functions. And now, this second example here is what you should already know by heart. Function declaration. Go a function, then the name for a function, empty brackets inside block of code. So this is like the entire thing is a function declaration, and the entire thing would be hoisted, meaning moved to the top of the program. However, if we use a function expression, and so for instance, we create a variable, we give it a name, and then we assign it this anonymous function. Whatever is assigned here, this isn't a function declaration. This is a value of that variable, meaning only this is a declaration, and only this mini bit here would be moved to the top of the program. Only declaration var without its value will be moved. And again, it will be assigned a value of undefined. So even though you've got your entire function here, this isn't visible because only declarations are moved, both for variables and for functions. After hoisting happens, a function declaration is higher than a variable declaration. So this has already been mentioned in our first example. Function will be moved to the top, and only after function has been moved or hoisted, the variable, the declaration of a variable will go to the top right after the function declaration. Hoisting and scope very much related, because we need to understand scope in order to understand where things are being hoisted, where are they moved, where are they after the hoisting happened. Got this mini example here. There's like loads of lines, and it makes it like a little bit confusing, but it isn't. So we've got a function and a name or log name, and what our function does would console log the name that doesn't exist yet. Underneath we have a declaration together with the assigned value, so it already with initialized value Lily, and at the end we are trying to console log user. Again, doesn't exist at this point yet. Later on, console log user, later declaration and initialization of a variable user with the value of Robin, and at the end I'm executing my function log a name. So when hoisting works its magic, the code will transform, not literally, but kind of like it's a symbolic transformation for us to understand, and it will look something like this. So since function was already on the top, it remains there. That variable name Lily will be hoisted to the top of its function scope. So the declaration is extracted, and it's at the top of its function scope here, at the top of its function, with a automatically assigned value of undefined. So at this point, variable name exists only with a value of undefined. I'm going to console log name Lily, name Lily, and at the end console log user. It all goes in the same order as the original order. Nothing has changed here. Then the program found the other thing to be hoisted as a variable user. Again, extracted the declaration, moved to the top, leaving the value behind. So variable user only as a declaration is at the top, and the rest goes as it was. Console log, the value of a user, and at the end, when we call the function log name. Any guess what should happen here first? The order of events, or how is this code analyzed? So function here at the top exists, but it doesn't do anything. Function on its own doesn't do anything. We need to call a function in order for the function to happen, for the function to be executed. So the first instruction to the program is to do that console log. Console log user. User at this point of the code execution has hoisted the variable but with the value of undefined. So it would print out undefined. The second instruction to the program is to log name. So we're calling our function log name. Log name, we are looking, the program goes inside that function and is looking for what we have instructed it to do. First instruction in the function is to console log name. That would be the third thing happening, because the program is looking for the instructions, is looking for what we ask it to do. Do this, then do this. Log name goes inside the function. There is the first instruction inside the function is to console log name, but unfortunately it's been hoisted but without the value, so it's still undefined. The next instruction would be console log user. When we try to console log user from inside that function, it's already been here, so it knows that the user is Robin, so it would print out Robin. It's very important to know how hoisting works in the reference to variables created with the keyword var, because there is still loads and loads and loads like the old programs written using the vars, even though generally when we write new programs we would not use vars, we use const and let. But it's still very important that we can read the code properly, and also to pass that interview, because they ask questions about variables created with the keyword var, even though it's not so like popular anymore. So as far as let and the const are concerned, this is quite a different story. So both let and const, according to the documentation, these are hoisted too, but there is a term of temporal dead zone, and I'll just show you at the example. So technically they are hoisted, but I would say not exactly. So it's like they are, but it doesn't work the same way as it works with variables with the keyword var. Let's comment this out. Let's uncomment this. So I've got a console log name, and after that I've created a variable using a keyword let, which already has a value of Dave, and if that was a var, what should happen? It would print out Dave. But if I change it to let, and I refresh this, we have a reference error. So at this point, even though it's been hoisted, it remains uninitialized. So it means that it's in this temporal dead zone, and so it kind of doesn't exist to the program. So it's very different to a variable create with the keyword var. And another example here, I've created a function which purpose is to say hi. So it would console log hi and the name. Let's give it name of John. So what should happen here? We've got a function and then creating that variable, and at the end I'm executing the function. So it would find that variable with the value of John. If, however, I would do almost the same thing as a function, say hello, and its purpose is to console hello and the value of a variable name too. But before I created that variable, I tried executing the function. So technically, if it was a variable with the keyword var, it would find that variable during the compilation phase and move it with the value of undefined. Let's see what happens with the let. I'm saving this, refreshing, and unfortunately again I've got an uncode reference error. Cannot access name2 before initialization. If I change it to a var, save it, refresh it, I've got hello undefined. Do you know why there is an undefined? It's because at this moment, when I'm trying to execute this function, hoisting worked. It moved the declaration of name2 to the top. It's a global variable, so it's been moved here, and however it didn't take the value of that variable with it. So Anya doesn't exist, it only exists at the end. But at the moment of like the execution of the function, say hello, it's been assigned a value of undefined, and that's why it's printing hello undefined. So I would totally recommend you guys play with it a little bit, get used to it, like see what's happening whenever you try to console log here, or if you switch places, or this line with this line, or if there was a var here, or if there was an empty value here, or see what happens, because only like through your own errors you will kind of like get used to it. And when the interview questions comes up, and you will have like that kind of example where there's a lot of like variable user, let name, and the const Patricia, and etc. Only if you tried yourself, you will be able to, like, without the computer, only using a marker and a whiteboard, like go through the code and be able to explain to them why you think that thing should happen or the other thing should happen. And even if you don't get it right, it's still like it shows that you've done your homework, that you've worked on your own, and that's what's often like appreciated. So again, thanks guys.